Welcome to Swanzey Then and Now. Today's host is me, Jody Turner, and Lee Dunham. I think we're going to become co-hosts. Yes, you're back. Yeah, I think we're going to become co-hosts because, Lee, I have to admit, I think you're doing a pretty good job, and you're here consistently, and you have a lot to share.
There's a lot to share and a lot more to learn. So.
Right. And you know, that is what I'm finding with doing research. I go to the Mount Caesar Library. They've got a nice section there that's got lots of history and things like that. And seriously, the more you learn, the less you know. So that's just what we've learned along the way. Today's show is going to be about one important gentleman. His name was Dr. Arthur Hopkins. And he was in West Swansea, and he probably did the larger part of Swansea anyway, because it wasn't like there was a lot of doctors around. But let's talk about his story. And his story is documented in this book called Pep, Pills, and Politics. Yeah. And if you know Swansea, you have to read this book.
You have to have this book.
That's right. So Lee and I were both competing here. We both have a copy that has a signature in it by Arthur Hopkins. Not that you have to have one, but yes, we do.
You can probably find one still.
I think you
Amazon
can. Yeah. And it was actually published in 1944, and it looks like printed over in Brattleboro. Yeah. So I don't know if he paid for the whole thing to be done or what, but
probably he did.
Yeah, because it was his story, and probably at that time people were like, yeah, whatever. But now it's got lots of history.
It is an absolutely fantastic read.
Right.
You have to, if you want to know what it was like to live in Swansea or in a New England town in the early 1900s, this is what you're going to get.
Right.
I mean, he tells a story of him growing up, but he then goes into his going to college at Dartmouth to become a teacher. And he goes through his 4 years of college to become a teacher, and he gets out, and he doesn't find a job. So what do? He turns around and goes back to Dartmouth and goes to medical school, and he becomes a doctor. So that's the gist of the Pep, Pills, and Politics. The Pep is pretty much this guy went all over the place. The pills are his doctor, but the politics, and that he gets into too.
He was very active in Swansea.
Because when he came to Swansea, he not only was our doctor, he ended up being the master of the Lincoln Grange.
Yeah.
He ended up being our moderator for a number of years.
For Swansea.
And he was the moderator when we had the town hall burn in 1913 and had to go through 3 meetings to decide to build it again. He was also the school doctor, the camp doctor out at the YMCA camp on Swansea Lake. What else did he do? Let's see.
But, you know, he was very active. And the thing is, it's not like it is now where you had 30 doctors or 100 doctors. You had one doctor.
Yeah.
And they had to be able to do everything.
And you didn't run to Keene to the emergency room.
No.
There was no
emergency room. There was no hospital. You had to, there were people that you could relate to and ask, questions to, but it might take you a day or two to get them.
If you talk to some old people, you find the people that, you went to his house. He made house calls.
He made house calls, right.
But you went to his house and he had all the stuff for pills and to make the things. And it's a different world. We don't understand.
And can you imagine, it wasn't like he could submit things for insurance. People paid with what they could pay, if they paid at all.
Yeah.
It was a tough time because you had a responsibility because you were a doctor, but you didn't know that you were going to get paid every time.
And he's true to his word of a doctor. He pretty much doesn't name names in this whole book.
Right.
He just tells you about the cases that he worked on. And a lot of people that lived in Swansea knew who he was talking about just by how he characterized somebody. But, he didn't name names. It's the only one that I can remember in the book when I wrote it probably, 5 or 6 years ago. But Orleans Eaton, he talks about Orleans Eaton. Now, Eaton Road, named after Orleans Eaton. He owned 2 farms on the Eaton Road. And one of them burned. It was right next to the railroad tracks. Of course, steam trains in those days emitted cinders and whatever. So his house burned, so he moved to the other one. And the funny story of Orleans Eaton, which is in the book, he's down by the Slate Bridge with his horse and wagon, with his little whip to get the horse's attention. And some youngsters with a car show up. And they were from Boston or whatever.
Didn't know you're supposed to drive slow. And,
And they went to rob him.
Oh.
And they pulled a gun on him.
Oh.
And he went to smack him with his whip, and they shot him, but they shot him in his hand. It really didn't even break a bone.
Wow.
But they said he died of lead poisoning from the bullet there.
Dr. Hopkins?
No.
Oh.
Orleans Eaton.
Oh, Orleans Eaton. Okay. Yes.
So that's in the book.
Uh-huh.
And that's the only name that I really recall him putting in
Referencing.
there.
Yeah. So let's take a look at Dr. Hopkins' life a little bit. We have a photograph of him as probably a 40-year-old gentleman, I believe, or so. There he is. Nice looking guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he was born in Vermont?
Yeah, upstate Vermont. Linden, I think it's the name.
Yep.
And that's where he grew up.
Yeah. And he references his mom in the book and how important she was in his rearing.
Yeah, that doesn't stay with me that well from the book. No.
But there's a photograph in it that he references
But
that he would never be who he was without what she gave to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a picture of his mom. There she is. And then not nursing school, but medical school.
But that's medical school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny, if you look at the picture in the bottom, that is a tumor of some kind. I mean, I'm serious, it's bigger than a ham. I can't imagine somebody having that in their body and living after taking that out. But that's the kinds of things that he did at medical school, because what I understand from reading the book is that much of the stuff that he learned at medical school was the more complicated stuff that honestly he probably wouldn't be doing every day. Unlike, going to somebody's house when they had a fever or whatever and having to try to figure out how he was supposed to treat people besides the fact that he was doing all of the medical stuff.
Yeah. And he would go hook up the horse and wagon and charge off, whenever he needed to.
Right.
That was the beginning when he first came. I think, well, we'll put it this way. In 1933, he was actually the Grand Marshal or the chairman of the committee for the 200th anniversary. That's the other thing he did for the town. And he had a float, which was, I think, his car.
Yes.
Which I think his car, and it was made into a bassinet.
Right.
With a stork.
Yeah.
And a little baby.
Didn't he win an
hanging
award
on
or
a thing.
something for that? Or
he might have won an award for that.
Yeah.
But it said 30 years of service, so
Right.
that was 1933. So
Yeah.
he would have come to Swansea probably
early
1903.
1900s. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So now, where did he live?
He lived right on the corner of Railroad Street and we'll call it Christian Hill Road because those are the two streets right on adjacent to his house.
Right. Now, was the house there, or was it moved?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. The house that he first came to is now not that house. It is the next house. It got moved from where it was to
Over.
the adjoining lot.
Uh-huh.
And then Denman Thompson had several houses down by his big house that he owned them, and he gave one to Dr. Hopkins.
Actually, when you say that, it looks a lot like a Denman Thompson house.
Well-
I mean, because it's got the ornate
Yeah.
fixtures on the sides and things.
So, the one, actually, if you ever look for J.A. French, took a series of pictures in 1886 from the belfry of it was the Baptist church then, now it's the community church. If you look at the house, and it's not the house that's there now. So in 1886, you see the house that Dr. Hopkins moved into.
Okay.
And then now it's the next door house.
Uh-huh.
So if you look at the two, look at that 1886 picture and then
Right.
look at that house next door.
Yeah.
You'll figure it out.
Huh.
You'll say, yeah, those look the same.
Yeah.
And this house that's there now was down by Denman's.
Yeah. Wow. I can't imagine moving these houses.
Well, it was easier. No electric wires,
Right.
for the most part.
Right.
And everybody had oxen.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
you put enough oxen against something and it rolls.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
Now, in this book, I didn't see a lot about his wife, but he does reference his daughter.
Yeah. His wife was, I think, very active in the church, which is the Baptist church or the community church, whichever one you're going to call. His gravestone is in Oak Hill Cemetery. And I believe
And Oak Hill, is that down in West Swansea?
in West Swansea,
The one
not too far
near
from
the
his
railroad
house.
track, kind of.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I believe it's got a picture of the Hopkins School, and I think it's got a picture of the Baptist Meeting House. So those two pictures on it. I first thought it was Wickham Hall, but when we really look at it, I think that was for her because she was involved in the
With
church.
the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And he was pretty good friends, as you mentioned, with Denman Thompson.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a picture of, well, I don't know where we're at with the pictures, but this is where he lived.
Yeah, there's
This
his
is
house.
after it was moved.
This is the new house. This is
Yep.
the house that's there now.
Yep. Yep. And then this is a picture of his daughter. And then the next one,
Who also, I believe, became a doctor.
oh, did she?
I believe she
Oh, that's
did.
great.
I think
That's
she ended
great.
up in Philadelphia.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And the next photograph, that was a steamer that was given to him, you said, by Denman Thompson?
Denman Thompson said the doctor should have an automobile
Instead of the horse
instead
and
of a
carriage like
horse
he
and
had?
carriage.
Yep.
So he gave him this, and it was whether it be a Stanley steamer, but it was a steam-powered car.
Yeah, yeah,
So that was his first.
yeah. And then this one here is the vehicle that he would travel around to the Swanzey residence to go and make house calls.
Here's another tidbit, if you didn't get this in the book.
Go ahead.
Somewhere on the Eaton Road,
Mm-hmm.
he had a horse die. You know,
He was a doctor, though.
yeah, somewhere on the horse. Because I read through there, and you never think about this. You know, your car dies. What do? You call
Right.
you call a wrecker, right, and get it towed away. What happens when your horse dies?
You get a big shovel.
You know, you can't whip a dead horse. And
Yeah.
but anyway, what happened is they got a guy and they dug a hole and it's buried someplace on the Eaton Road.
The stories we know.
I mean, it's one of those things we don't think of that kind
No,
of stuff.
no, because
But
it's a different day.
You know,
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. He did go and do house calls. So we have a photograph of him at the YMCA camp, I believe.
yes, yeah.
Checking on.
This is before it's Pilgrim Pines or Camp Squanto, before it was Camp Jewel even, I believe. This was the Hartford YMCA had a camp, the first camp. So.
Yeah. And then the next photograph is the Hopkins School. So
Right.
tell me a little bit about this because I have never heard of the Hopkins School.
Well, way back when we had a schoolhouse, schoolhouse number 1 was on Lake Street, or actually on, now it's Underwood Road,
This is near Wilson Pond,
near Wilson Pond on the north
off 32.
north side.
Yep.
Then, as we got toward the 20s, we started to build schools. And the Hopkins School, or at first, it was the factory school, or it's called for Swanzey Factory, which is what North Swansea was. We didn't call it North Swansea. If you went back into the 20s, you called it Swanzey Factory or Factory Village because of the mills. So this school was on Route 32, across from
Sort
the
of
Houghton-
like Park
Houghton
Place, but
Point
down a little
area,
bit further. Yeah.
but it's now Kingdom Hall. and they did so much renovation to it.
So
you'd never
is
know
the
it
original
anymore.
building underneath it
Somewhere underneath there, I think, is
Yep.
the skeleton of it, but
Uh-huh.
from there,
Right. And so what grades would they do? Would
Well,
it be just older or younger or?
no, well, I think this is before Monadnock. So your schools went first grade through eighth grade. And then once you reached eighth grade, you went to the city of Keene to their school for 4 years. Or some went to Winchester if they lived in the south part of
Right.
town.
Yep.
And I've heard a few that went to Troy. But
Yeah. Yeah.
most everybody went to Keene.
Yeah. Yeah. So the last photograph that we have is of Dr. Hopkins again. And I just wonder, like, are there any stories that you would like to share, Lee, about Dr. Hopkins that we haven't talked about today?
Trying to think, what else? The one thing that I took away from the beginning of his life, and when he was in Dartmouth, again, he was trying to be a teacher then. And it's amazing, you'd walk every place,
Right.
or you'd ride your bike. Now, this is even as a college student. I mean, you think about this, and it's like, it was nothing for him to ride his bike miles. And the thing that we don't understand is, well, geez, if you ride 10 miles away from your house, you have to ride 10 miles back. Well, not always did you have to do that. If you rode 20 miles away and you were near a train
road.
station,
Right.
you just hopped the train, put your bike on the train, and rode back.
Right.
And there's a lot of talk of how he'd ride around town and ride around the state, and it's like,
And those bikes
I
weren't the
can't
same
think of it.
bikes that we have now
yeah,
either.
I can't think about doing that.
Right.
It's like, and this was nothing for him.
Right.
So
Yeah. What I took out of the book mostly was like how committed he was to the community. Because
Yeah.
as I said before, he went out and sometimes he wouldn't get paid. Or he maybe didn't like the people that he had to go and be the doctor for. Or the people didn't like him for some reason. Or somebody passed and they would take it as a grudge against him
yeah,
because there was nothing that he could do, so being the only doctor could cause some problems.
yeah. And actually, the doctor that was here before, I was just reading that part of it, and didn't remember it from before, but the doctor that was here before, that he bought the house from and sort of bought the practice from, was actually pretty much run out on a rail, if you will, because of a bad condition with the patient.
Yep.
Everybody was up in arms, and so he figured it was time for him to go, and that's where Dr. Hopkins came in. And the other thing is you get a glimpse of what life is like in houses without central heat.
They didn't have anything.
You-
Water?
You stop thinking about this. You start thinking about this, and it's like people didn't have the things that we have. I mean, they'd be under piles of blankets in the wintertime. That's how they existed.
Yeah.
It's a real eye-opener to look at this. And I know my house. I've got pictures of my house before central heat. So when my grandmother bought the house in 1937, there was not a steam boiler in the cellar. There was nothing, just fireplaces and a wood stove in the kitchen.
And how much heat does a fireplace put off? Not much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot, but a lot up the chimney.
Right,
So, I mean,
right.
you use a lot of wood.
Yeah.
So this is the time he comes in. And he has to go out and harness the horse. There's
Yeah.
one time
It's not like he's got somebody else doing all this stuff for
there's
him.
one story he talks about in the middle of the night going to somebody's house where he dropped one of the horse reins. And he's lucky to be alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
mean,
I think I read something else where, like he would get the call that, and it wasn't like, it was like just calling up on the phone, like, hello. But, sometimes
Yeah.
it would take an hour or two to get someplace, or it might be a snowstorm or whatever. And then he'd get there and then they didn't need him. Like this is part of being a doctor, I guess, in that time, is that you had to go out because it was your job and you were committed to it, but It didn't always work out the way that you had hoped. So he was located in West Swansea. Just talking about West Swansea a little bit. Now that I've learned a little bit more as we've been doing these shows, it seems like there was a lot going on in West Swansea.
Yeah.
Why is it that West Swansea wasn't like the center of Swansea?
You know, there's been that fight going on for a number of years.
Is it still happening?
Well, to some extent,
Yeah.
but I think it's a little less now. Understand back in the day, I mean, when the town hall burnt in 1913, there was actually, and I think I thought I even had it. Yes, I do. You didn't know I had this with me.
I did not. What is that?
But this is just a photocopy of the annual report for 1907. In 1907, our selectmen were Joseph Starkey, Ansel Bourne, and George E. Wickham. And our moderator was George Wickham also.
Yeah.
Well, so at our town meeting in 1907, we had an article on the warrant to see if the town would vote to build a town hall in West Swansea and raise money for the same, and dispose of the town hall in Swansea Center.
Things could have been a lot different.
Obviously, it did not pass.
Why?
I don't know. See, I just have the.
You had some pretty strong guys in West Swansea. It's hard to believe that they didn't get it changed.
But it didn't get changed, obviously. But what? 1913, 6 years later, it burns to the ground. And there were three meetings to try to get it to move to West Swansea. Because, well, Dr. Hopkins, in the book, you find out that Dr. Hopkins, that the people in West Swansea stayed away from the meeting, the first meeting. Because if there wasn't enough people voting,
right.
they couldn't do
didn't
anything.
vote. Yeah.
And they did that the first two meetings. The third meeting was in the Universalist Church in West Swansea. And they lost, I think it was by 9 votes. So,
Can you imagine?
So what you're talking about, it was very
Competitive,
Well, in
I
Dr.
mean.
Hopkins, they said, you know, it was pretty much that they were looking for anybody and anybody who
Right.
could walk in there and vote.
And breathe. Yeah.
And Westport was actually sought upon by the West Swansea people to be an ally. Hey, you
Yeah.
come vote for this,
Right.
and we'll
We'll help you.
help you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but understand too, back in those days, the difference, or the distance between West Swansea and Swansea Center was greater.
Right.
Because
Now
it
it takes
wasn't a
10
bunch of
minutes to get-
houses.
right.
Yeah, it wasn't a bunch of houses.
Yeah.
There was the Eaton Road, which is
Yeah.
a notoriously bad road.
Right.
You know, it's still, they're going to redo it this year.
Yeah.
But it was a muddy mess in the springtime.
Yeah. It wasn't like they had pavement
I mean,
there
I've
and-
talked to old people, and they'll tell me that, you know, when Swansea Center wanted to get something over, if it was a bad mud season, well, people from West Swansea couldn't get across the Eaton Road to go to town meeting.
So that they won it in West Swansea. So anyway,
So
today,
maybe it was a bad day.
yeah, you never know. Okay, so today we talked about pet pills and politics. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk more about West Swansea, Swansea Center, East Swansea, North Swansea, and Westport.